All right, so here I have the color version of the logo I designed. I am in Illustrator. I have already saved my EPS black and white logo, and that's important. So I'm going to go ahead and save that just to remind you as an EPS file to the desktop with the name Assignment 6 in there in black and white or black logo. And it's more appropriately black than just black and white because it's a cutout of black. So I was showing in the last demo how I could replace the colors, color replacement method, right? So I have all of these images or all of these previously black paths that have been replaced with color paths. And notice there still is nothing behind them. So it can be on a red website. It would work differently than on a gray website or on a gray shirt. So what if I want to actually fill in some of the colors? So this is what I call the stained glass method of coloring. All right. So in order to make that really clear, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my color layer. And I'm going to lock it and lock my black outline layer. And I'm going to create a new layer that I move underneath my black line layer. And I'm going to call this my color fill layer. But you can think of it like stained glass. And if I want a certain color of glass behind this whole circle, what can I do? Well, I'm going to make a new shape. You can use the shape tool for it. You could draw it with the pencil tool. And then you can always modify it later. And I want that to stretch behind my circle, and then I'm going to fill it with a color. Right? Any color I like. I could also fill it with a gradient. Just like stained glass, you can have a glass that's uneven. And you can change the colors of that gradient as you see fit. Okay, so now if you fill in behind, you'll notice you can control the gradient through the angle. It's a little less intuitive than Photoshop, right? In that you have to do it in these different ways. If I wanted to go horizontal, you do 90 degrees. But that can be nice. Oh, then I just made a duplicate. Now, these are your basic coloring options within Illustrator. So I can do a combination of color replacement and color fills. Right? And then if you just want solid fills, I would do them in that same unlocked layer. Like for this leaf, for instance, I could just draw it with the pencil tool. And why I call it the stained glass method is usually I'll draw it roughly outside of the shape, just like you would with a hunk of colored glass. And you pick a color for it. Do a dark green. And then you would go in and you would use your pencil tool, or you could use the pen tool, and you would refine it to go underneath the line work that's already there. In stained glass, that's called the leading, and this kind of fine-tuning and chipping of the glass, breaking it off to the exact shape, is called grazing. And it feels weird because we're so used to digital paint programs where you just like fill in shapes with a click of a button and a paint bucket tool. But that's not true for vector shapes, right? Because it's not pixels that we're filling. So you can see that grazed shape. You know, these are the solids that are underneath. All right? Now, sometimes you just want something really basic, and I think that's what I'm going to do for my color. I'm just going to draw another 2 kind of stained glass shapes. I'll try to keep them under my line work, but if they don't fit exactly, I could always refine them. And then I'm going to use my eyedropper tool to fill them into the exact same color. So I'm going to fill in these leaves. All right. Use the eyedropper tool. I might fill in this little bud cap here. Generally, logos are trying to be really clear, efficient, not overdone. So you don't always want thousands of colors. You often want very limited color. And something like this could help it be effective, right? And then maybe I add a different color for this. And I'm not giving a whole lot of thought to my colors right now. But remember that if you want better selection, you can click on the color selector. And then you can edit the shape. And then maybe one last one where I might do 2 different tones of green before I show you how we can color this within Photoshop. So a dark earthy green, and then here I'll show you the grazing again. Just cut it too big in one area. And then use your refining tools like the pencil to cut through an anchor point and in through an anchor point. And they're like magic scissors. Why is it doing that? There we go. And as long as it's behind the black line, you're good. It's like stained glass, right? So if I turned off the black line, I just have my little panes of colored glass. And they can be gradients as well. I can even play with their transparency, which then allows the background color to still come through. So let me say that this is beautiful and I love it. All right. I think maybe I want one more thing. Maybe I want the pink to be in this little shadow as well. So I'll do that. But I'm committed to keeping this the last demo. Now, because I don't need to be as exact with my line work, I'm actually doing all of this with the mouse. And in many ways, Illustrator is kind of ideal for the mouse because it's all about clicking somewhere specifically. And you run into real problems when you're not clicking exactly where it wants you to. I'm going to match this pink, fill that in, and then just clean it up by grazing it with the pencil tool right here. But the times I use the tablet is with the blob brush and refining, finished line work or finished black shapes with the pencil tool. And especially when using the blob brush and the eraser because you can make them pressure sensitive, which gives you a lot more control. All right, so let's say that's my finished color logo in Illustrator. Now, because this background fill is transparent, watch what happens when I move it onto the gray background. Then the inside becomes darker, which is kind of nice. Right? Kind of like stained glass. So what do I do with my color logo? Just like my black and white, I say File, Save. First save it as an AI file. And then Save As. Make sure you have your name, assignment 6, and color in the name. You're going to save it to the desktop as an EPS file. And those are some of the basic ways to color, but let me show you another way. because maybe your logo doesn't require so much color. Or color just looks silly on it because it's a very minimal logo. What we can do, and this is how we submit it as well, I have my EPS files there. I'm going to open up Photoshop, but notice I'm not going to open up the EPS in Photoshop. If I went on to one of the EPS files and say open with Photoshop, it will force me to rasterize it. It will force me to turn it into a pixel-based image. And I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to go into Photoshop, say File, New, put in your name, Assignment 6, and we're going to do black logo first. And then what size do we want? Well, we get to determine it because a vector can be any size we want. I want it to be 11 by 14, right? Except I want the width to be 11 and the height to be 14 by 350 pixels per inch with white as the background contents. There we go. Then, just like we did with our early compositing projects, like the cartoon jumble, fantasy landscape, I'm going to take my EPS file from the desktop, the vector file, drag and drop it onto my Photoshop file, and then if I hold down Option and Shift, I can grow it from the center, knowing that this would be the mat, and decide how would the logo best look within the mat, hit Return, and as a smart object, it's going to perfectly match that resolution. So now it is pixel-based, but if I were to grow this more, the smart object would grow to fill it, and it would still be perfectly clean. Okay? Now, I save that, I turn the background off, and I save it, File, Save As, to the desktop, a transparent but online file format, which would be PNG, right? The problem with a PNG that's only a black cutout is that it shows up fine on white or on black, white or gray, but it won't show up well on a black background, right? So how can we make it work for all? Well, if we turn off our background, but we turn on our layer styles for our smart object. You can do layer styles to smart objects. It's a great way to color vectors and add effects. I am going to just add what's called an outer glow. And I'm going to make it white. I'll go ahead and make it normal mode, 100% opacity. And I get to decide how big it is. If I zoom in, you'll see what this looks like. And it's putting white pixels glowing around. And this is one thing I'll do. If I make a new background layer and I fill it, edit fill with black, you'll see how that outer glow helps your logo stand out. Without it, you can barely see your logo. And you can decide for it to be a sharp, if you want it to be a sharp, what's called an offset, instead of outer glow, you can use stroke, just like in Illustrator. And we can make that stroke white, which is what I recommend for your black and white logo. And you can play with the size of it, how thick or thin it is. Right? And all of those are adaptable. I think that looks pretty good. So that's an even better PNG to save because now it has an offset to it. It will show up on even dark backgrounds, on dark t-shirts. So once you're happy with it, save it as a PNG and save it as a PSD. Just by hitting File, Save with multiple layers, it will save as a PSD for you, a Photoshop document. Now let's do the color one. Well, let's say I never colored it. I could use effects also to add color. The first is color overlay. You might remember this. We did a little bit of this with the cartoon jumble. I can play with the opacity of the color overlay. We can also do gradient overlay. Ooh, look at that. To make it fancy looking.